Hi, I'm Chris Green, the History Chap, telling the fascinating, forgotten and sometimes unfashionable stories from history which we didn't learn about at school. The Anglo-Sikh Wars, fought in the 1840s, were probably the bloodiest the British ever fought in India. 9,000 British and Bengali troops and well over 20,000 Sikhs were killed or wounded in 7 epic battles and 1 siege. Marked by incredible bravery on both sides and with a good dose of incompetence and accusations of treachery thrown in, the wars would change India forever. And yet, so many people have a very limited knowledge about them. Well, unless you're a fan of Harry Flashman, of course. So, I've decided to make a series about those 2 wars. And today, I'm starting with how the First War started in 1845 and the opening battle, the Battle of Mudki. During the early 19th century, the Sikh kingdom of the Punjab, a region now encompassing parts of northern India and eastern Pakistan, was built and expanded under the rule of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. During the same period, British India was also growing under the control of the East India Company, so that by the 1830s, its territory was adjacent to the Punjab. Ranjit Singh, in his capital at Lahore, was fully aware that a showdown between the Punjab and the British was, if not inevitable, certainly probable. He decided that his only defence would be to match the British in firepower for that day of reckoning. He built his army, the Khalsa, into the most formidable force the British would ever face in India. The backbone were his 29,000 regular infantry. Dressed in European-style uniforms and drilled by European mercenaries, they were armed with the latest muskets, expertly manufactured in the foundries of Lahore. Those foundries also produced over 190 cannon, as good as any produced in Britain. Once more trained by mercenaries from across Europe, but also from America, like men like Alexander Gardner, and there were even some British, the Sikh gunners became every bit as fast and accurate as anything the East India Company could range against them. Foreign observers also marvelled at his cavalry and the skill of his lancers, although the Sikh cavalry were possibly his Achilles heel, as alongside their reputation for skill, they also had a reputation for ill discipline. This modern European-influenced corps were backed up by tens of thousands of irregular forces. And whilst the army of the Punjab is usually referred to as the Sikh army, it should be noted that it also contained significant numbers of Muslims and also Hindus. The Khalsa army swiftly defeated the Sikhs' neighbours, and in particular the Afghans. And with those victories, there really was only one enemy left, the British East India Company. Whilst Ranjit Singh was pragmatic enough to plan for an eventual showdown, he was canny enough to know how to deal with the British in the current peace, when to be their ally and how not to be without provoking them. Not only could he keep the British in check, he also knew how to keep his ever more powerful and self-confident Khalsa in check too. It would never do to have an army getting too big for its boots. After all, history is littered with leaders who fall foul of their troops. And then in 1839 everything changed. Ranjit died and the Punjab descended into chaos. Various family members vied for the throne, with many meeting Game of Thrones type ends. First up was his only son, Karak Singh, a degenerate opium addict. He lasted just over a year until he was poisoned by his own son, Nan Nihal Singh. A day after the murder, the 19-year-old was returning from his father's cremation. As he passed under an archway in Lahore, a falling block of masonry just happened to kill him. He was now succeeded by the oldest of Ranjit's illegitimate children, Sher Singh. During his brief reign, he faced a plot to replace him, orchestrated by Karak Singh's widow. But the plot was snuffed out when the widow was crushed to death by a huge stone while she took a bath. But now Sher Singh came up against a far more powerful enemy. With the power vacuum that was engulfing the Punjab, the Khalsa started to flex their muscles. Sher desperately tried to bribe the army, but when the money ran out, he was murdered by his own men. Old Ranjit's youngest son, 5-year-old Dalip Singh, was now placed on the throne, with his mother, Mahaani Jindan, acting as regent. Jindan now attempted a difficult balancing act of trying to control the Khalsa by making noises about going to war with the British, whilst also trying not to provoke the British, and at the same time trying to preserve her son on the throne against other family claimants, some of whom were seeking support from the British. The struggle with the Khalsa came to a head when her brother, who she'd installed as wazir, sort of like a prime minister, was murdered in front of Jindan and the young Dalip by the Khalsa. Many believed that the war with the British was in part manipulated by Jindan to clip the Khalsa's wings in revenge. We'll never really know her mind. While she courted the Khalsa by promising a war with the British, she also placed them under the command of two of her supporters, Tej Singh and her new wazir and lover, Lal Singh. Their actions in the war with the British could at best be seen as incompetent, or at worst, treacherous. I'll let you decide as we go through the battles and the episodes. What we do know is that by 1845, just 6 years after Ranjit Singh's death, the Punjab was on its fourth Maharaja. The Khalsa was almost a law unto themselves and had emptied the treasury, and many in the Khalsa were openly arguing for war with the British, if for nothing else but to seize some booty. Many in the Khalsa were also confident that following their poor performance in Afghanistan recently, the British were far from invincible. Over on the British side of the border, that instability in the Punjab was causing concerns. The British had always seen a strong, well-controlled Punjab under Ranjit Singh as a buffer against both Afghanistan and the Russian Empire beyond. The Governor-General, Sir Henry Hardinge, initially hoped that the Maharani would rebuild a stable government in the Punjab, but he was unsure whether she could, or whether she was really a friend or an enemy. Many British argued that their authority would always be limited in India, so long as a militarily strong Punjab remained. They argued openly for a war to destroy the Khalsa and for outright annexation. Indeed, boats were being built that could carry British troops across the Sutlej River into Punjab. Unsure as to Mahaani Jindan's true agenda, but with the Khalsa leaders advocating war, the British Governor-General, Sir Henry Hardinge, decided to move troops closer, although not too close, to the border. A veteran of the Napoleonic War, Hardinge had for the past 30 years pursued a political career. Serving as a Member of Parliament, Hardinge, a close friend of the Duke of Wellington, had ended up as Secretary of War prior to taking over in India in 1844. As Governor-General, whilst he was Supreme Commander of the British forces in the subcontinent, he waived his right to command in the forthcoming conflict, in favour of the Commander-in-Chief of the Army, General Hugh Gough. From Limerick, Ireland, Gough too was a veteran of the Napoleonic War. Affectionately known as Tipperary Joe, he had commanded the British forces during the First Opium War in China, before being made C&C India in 1843. Here, he successfully defeated the Marathas during the Gwalior campaign in Sindh region of modern-day Pakistan, sort of the part that runs eastwards from Karachi to the Indian border. Despite his victory, there were many who questioned his tactics. Gough seemed to be locked in a Napoleonic Wars thinking, and his solution to any battle seemed to be fix bayonets and charge. The previous Governor-General, Lord Ellenborough, Hardinge's brother-in-law by the way, had written of Gough to the Duke of Wellington that, quote, despite his many excellent qualities, he had not the grasp of mind and the prudence essential to conduct great military operations, unquote. Whilst many in the corridors of power might be concerned about his tactics, his rank-and-file soldiers loved him. He cared about his men, and he was brave, invariably leading from the front in his very obvious white coat. But above all, he was a winner, even if those wins came at a cost. But what he called his Tipperary rush, up and atom tactics, would bring the British to within a whisker of defeat against arguably the most formidable enemy they ever faced in India. The British build-up of troops close to the border could be seen from two different viewpoints. Either an act of defence, or the first step towards an invasion. And many in Lahore interpret it as the latter. And it wasn't as if all senior British officials did have peaceful intentions. Accordingly, they decided to strike before the British did. On the 3rd of December 1845, the Khalsa crossed the Sutlej River into the East India Company territory. The First Anglo-Sikh War had started, and I'll cover the great battles in this war and then in the Second War in upcoming episodes. Today, I'm going to share the first of those battles, the Battle of Mudki, fought on the 18th of December 1845. The Sikhs advanced on two fronts. One Sikh army under Tej Singh advanced on Firozpur. There the British garrison of 7,000 under General Littler were hopelessly outnumbered and outgunned. Tej, however, refused to attack and laid siege to the garrison instead. At the same time, Lal Singh led another army, consisting of somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 cavalry, 2,000 infantry and 22 guns, towards Moodkee, some 18 miles 29 kilometres from Firozpur. Caught on the hop by an army larger and as well equipped as theirs, Hardinge and Gough hurriedly decided on a plan of action. Gough, accompanied by Hardinge, would march south from Ludhiana to Firozpur with a force of 11,000 men and 42 guns. There he would add Littler's 7,000 men to his force. His army was made up of both British regular soldiers and regiments from the East India Company controlled Bengal. Gough drove his men the 114 miles to the Sutlej in just 5 days. With little water or food, it was no mean physical feat. On the 18th of December, Gough's army reached Moodkee. Parched, hungry and yellow from the dust, they had covered 20 miles on that day alone. As his men settled down in the afternoon for their first decent meal in days, at around 4 p.m, the Sikh army under Lal Singh, alerted by the dust clouds, interrupted them with an artillery bombardment. The Battle of Mudki had begun. And on paper the two armies seemed evenly matched, something like 12,000 on each side. But that initial glance belies the true nature of the British and Sikhs in this opening battle of the war. The vast bulk of the Sikh army were made up of cavalry, whereas Gough, with 12 regiments, had far more infantry. These infantry regiments included 4 British regiments of the line, the 90th, 31st, 50th and 80th Foot. The 9th would later become the Norfolk Regiment, the 31st would become the East Surrey Regiment, and the 50th would become the Royal West Kents. The 80th would become the South Staffordshire Regiment. And whilst the British had 42 guns versus the Sikhs 22, they were lighter than the Sikhs, and the Sikhs had entrenched their own guns, making them a formidable opposition. As his first move, Gough ordered 5 troops of horse artillery under Brigadier Brooke to advance within 300 yards of the Sikh lines and open fire. As the artillery duel continued and the day's light began to fade, the Sikh cavalry started to move through the dust and smoke, aiming to encircle both flanks of Gough's army. The Irishman spotted the danger and ordered his own counter-attack. The 3rd Light Dragoons from the British Army, supported by 3 Bengal cavalry regiments, the 5th Bengal Light Cavalry, the Governor-General's bodyguard, and part of the 4th Bengal Lights swept to the left. Meanwhile, the rest of the 4th Bengal Light Cavalry, along with the 9th Bengal Light Cavalry, attacked on the right. In a spectacular charge, the 3rd Light Dragoons turned the Sikhs' left flank and started to descend on the infantry and guns. They attacked with such ferocity that the Sikhs were to nickname them the Devil's Children. Now it was the Redcoat infantry's turn to advance, with the British regiments at the front. Despite the cavalry's success, the Sikh infantry and guns were still entrenched. Not that this worried Gough. The veteran of the Napoleonic Wars formed his men up just like they had at Waterloo, and he ordered them to charge with fixed bayonets. His men called it Gough's Tipperary Rush. As the British and Bengali infantry advanced in tight formations, the Sikh lines erupted in a wall of fire and smoke. The British regulars in the vanguard hadn't experienced anything like it for 30 years, as musket balls and grape shot tore into their ranks. Behind them, the Indian regiments fired indiscriminately into the gloom towards the Sikh guns. But rather than hitting the enemy, it was the men of the leading British regiments that they hit. As officers desperately tried to restrain the eager Bengali infantrymen, Gough rode forward. Oblivious to danger, in his white battle coat, he shouted to his men to capture the guns. The problem was What with the smoke and the dust and the growing darkness of night, many of his men were struggling to see exactly where the enemy guns were. The battle now descended into a confused melee in the surrounding jungle. Many inexperienced soldiers, pumped up with adrenaline, still continued to fire at anything that moved, even if it was their own side. Soldiers nicknamed this confused battle Midnight Moodkee. Despite their heroic and tenacious resistance, Gough's superior infantry numbers started to make a difference, and the Sikhs fell back into the jungle. Interestingly, their commander, Lal Singh, had left the battlefield long beforehand, which can either be interpreted as at best dereliction of duty, or at worst treachery. General Hugh had won the first battle of the war, but his army, British and Bengali, infantry and cavalry, had lost 215 killed and 657 wounded, many of whom would not survive. His Tipperary rush might have been brave, but it cost his British infantry dearly. Of the 870 men sent forward, 414 were dead or wounded. The 31st Regiment of Foot received 157 casualties. Sergeant Jones was given an immediate battlefield commission for picking up the regiment's fallen colour and leading his men on to the Sikh positions. The 50th had lost 109 men killed or injured. Like the 31st, their colour had also fallen in the advance and had been picked up by General Sir Harry Smith, who personally carried it ahead of the men as they rushed at the enemy. The 3rd Light Dragoons, the Devil's Children, had lost a fifth of their men as casualties and over 100 horses. 2 brigadiers and 2 generals were killed in the battle. Amongst them was General Robert Sale, the hero of the siege of Jalalabad during the recent Afghan campaign. The losses, brought on by Gough's full frontal charge with fixed bayonets, caused disquiet amongst the British authorities, both locally and in London. Governor-General Hardinge wrote that the confusion of the attack created the feeling that the army was not well in hand. He would conduct a briefing campaign trying to get Gough replaced for the rest of the war. Sikh losses are not known, but based upon the ferocity of the fighting, they must have been substantial. They'd also lost 17 of their 22 guns, and their commander had gone AWOL, which didn't bode well for the rest of their campaign. However, they had retreated in reasonably good order and had lived to fight another day. And that day would not be far away. It would be a far bigger, equally confusing and even bloodier encounter, and once more would be marked by bravery, incompetence and treachery. And that battle at Ferozeshah will be the next episode in this series on the Anglo-Sikh Wars. Well, I hope you enjoyed that story, and if you did, you might enjoy this one too that's appearing on the screen now. Give it a click. Make sure you subscribe to my channel too, so you don't miss the next episode on these Anglo-Sikh Wars. Thanks for joining me today. Keep well, and I'll see you again very soon.